Welcome back to Empowered and Out, the LGBTQ plus career coaching podcast. I am your host, Jonathan Barbe, and every week we dive into real stories and strategies to help you find purpose, confidence, in workplaces where you don't have to hide who you are. Today, I'm joined by Daniele Brunetto, a career coach who specializes in helping professionals navigate multicultural environments and career transitions. Daniela works with clients who are stuck in those so called dream jobs, the ones that might sound impressive but feel toxic, draining, and unsafe. He helps them leave behind the prestige trap and discovers careers where they can thrive in spaces that actually celebrate their culture of origin. We're going to talk about what it means to show up authentically in multicultural workplaces, how culture shapes what's normal in the office, and how you can spot whether a company's culture will truly support you. Plus, you'll hear some personal stories that shine a light on how cultural differences can play out at work in surprising and sometimes hilarious ways. So, if you're a longtime listener or tuning in for the first time, I am so glad that you're here. And Daniela, welcome to Empowered and Out. I am so glad that you are here.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very glad.
All right. Well, let's start with your journey. So, what led you to this work of helping people leave toxic prestige jobs and find something more aligned?
So, the easiest answer for that is probably the fact that I was in one of them. I was in a prestige jobs that on paper looked amazing and I loved it in some terms, but it was not aligned. So, I had a great salary, I had a great team. I was speaking four languages in the same day sometimes. I actually felt it was one of the best jobs I've ever had. And it was aligned with my values as well, in terms of political values, for example, and social values. So it was great from the outside and also for a couple of years on the inside. But then at some point, I just realized that it was not aligned with what I wanted and who I was and who I am anymore. So that's when I started to realize that something was missing. But I didn't realize it until I actually went on burnout. I like to use metaphors in my coaching and in general in my life. So for me, that was the red traffic light moment. At some point I had to stop.
Mhm.
And my body was like, look, there's something that you need to address and you need to address it now. I felt
What?
that my body was, sorry,
No, go ahead.
I felt that my body was actually giving me signals even before that, but I couldn't listen. And I like to use other metaphors in terms of my mind as the captain of my ship, of my life, was not listening to the crew, that is my body. So this, I realized, okay, I need to address some of the questions that I've always had in the back of my mind. And I realized that I wanted to do something that was more aligned with what I wanted. I've always wanted to study psychology when I was 18, for example, and then somehow I didn't do it. And so I just went back to my first love in a way. So I realized then after I decided to become a coach that a lot of people in my entourage, like a lot of people around me, actually are in the same position. So for context, I live in Brussels, Belgium, and this is the capital of Belgium, but this is also the capital of Europe. A lot of people work in very prestigious jobs in the European Commission, the European Union in general, or at NATO or the United Nations. So a lot of people have really, really good jobs, really prestigious, but then they just feel empty and then they feel that this job is actually a trap. So I realized I was one of them. I managed to come out from this job thanks to a career coach. So I'm going to give back to the world in a way that I can just help someone else to do the same things that I've done. So live a more aligned life. And in this specific case, find a job that is more aligned with our values and our belief systems and our passions and what we believe it's us. So here I am.
I find it very interesting because I just had this conversation, excuse me, with actually another coach, and we were talking about very similar situations where your body is telling you it's time to move on. A lot
Yeah.
of times your body reacts faster than your brain. And
Hmm.
so here's just a, hint to the listeners. You should listen to your body when it's telling you something. It's
Absolutely.
time to change, or you need to not be doing this, or even as something as simple as, which is completely off topic, but even don't eat something or don't drink something a certain way, if your body is reacting to us into something that you're doing to it,
Hmm.
either good or bad, it's going to tell you. Our bodies are pretty smart, and they're going to let us know the good and the bad and what we should be doing and not. But it's even, I believe, stronger, especially when you're in a job, you're in a career
Yes.
where it's, if you're feeling, the frustration, the struggles, what's the point of doing
Yeah.
this? It's definitely time to find a different direction of to do something that's really going to keep you in a better frame of mind, but also overall to help with your overall mental health, because
Absolutely.
that's what it comes down to. We all need to be in a better mental health
Yeah.
space, and when we're in that better health space, we're going to be, obviously, as we've, like with career coaching, you're going to be a much better worker, you're going to be much more successful because
Indeed.
you're just feeling better.
That's
So was Yeah.
absolutely, I agree totally with what you say, and that is exactly what I see happening with my clients as well. And when they start listening to their bodies and they understand what their bodies are trying to say, sometimes even the symptoms, once they realize what to change and they do change them, that thing, let's say, those symptoms they just go away. I remember one of the clients, for example, I had and had a constant, as I do, for example, sometimes constant, the shoulders were always contracted. Once they
Mm.
started to, with a first step to step out of the toxic job that they had, well, the shoulders just started without doing anything, but just to relax easily, slowly, slowly. But then it was just going to become way easy to just live, and move. So even just addressing with a couple of steps, that's also what I try to teach and to guide my clients to do. Just tune in, listen to what the body's saying, try to stop at the orange, at the amber traffic light, not at the red one. Don't do what I did. I had to go on burnout to realize that I actually wanted to become a coach. So if I can help even just one person to do that, that's well, my life is absolutely fulfilled.
Well, and just to go back a little bit, I like that you actually got a career coach who helped you
Yeah,
to get where you needed to be. Just a little side note for both of us. I mean, we're career coaches. We're doing this. We want to help you. That is our job.
exactly.
And that's what we want to do. That's why we're doing what we do, is to help you. Just take that with what you want, listeners, but I'm just going to say, yeah, that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this, because this is what we love to do.
Indeed. There's also a funny story with that when I started a journey with this career coach, who's Italian and lives as well here in Brussels, 2 sessions in, or maybe 3, but I think it was 2 sessions in, I realized what I wanted to do. And I even told her, I looked at her and I said, I actually want to do your job. And she laughed and she was like, okay, well, that's a good thing. And you want to do, and you know what you want to do, but we still have some things to do together. And I was like, yeah, of course, of course. But I came in that I had no idea where I wanted to go, absolutely no idea. And then in a couple of sessions, I realized that I wanted to do what she was doing because it was coherent with what I've always done in my life and what I always felt was kind of calling me all the time. And so, yeah, we still laugh about it. Like, I see her and I talk with her and we still laugh. And it's like, well, 2 sessions in and you already knew everything. It's like, yeah, this is the power of coaching. Once you get someone that listens to you attentively and holds a
Mhm.
space, a safe space for you to be completely yourself, magic happens even in a couple of sessions.
Yeah, for sure. So you often work with people navigating multicultural environments.
Mhm.
Why do you think these workplaces can feel especially tricky when it comes to authenticity?
Because authenticity is actually defined in different ways in different cultures. I always try to use examples to help the listeners in this case understand. Some of even in some Western countries, and I'm Italian, I'm from the South, and even in Italy we have some differences. But you can imagine in the 27 countries that make the European Union, we have a bunch of differences, let alone with other countries in the West. And still we share a lot of cultural points, let's say. I don't want to use heavy words. So in this case, even when we share the same culture, even when we say some references, still there are some things that we think, oh, I'm going to be authentic if I talk about this, if I share about my family, if I laugh or if I sit close to a colleague. That's actually one of the stories that we mentioned. And we're all from Europe. So these are, for example, my colleagues have always been from different countries in Europe. So it's tricky because I thought that I was being authentic, being myself, my Italian self, my Southern Italian self, my Mediterranean self, just saying something and, sharing some personal stuff, for example. And then I realized as soon as I arrived here that other cultures, they don't think that this means being authentic. Sometimes they think that it means too much. So, and as a context for people maybe who don't know, Brussels in Belgium is actually the second most cosmopolitan city in the world after Dubai. So unless you work for the Belgian state, and even there, that's another story for another moment, but there are two cultures in this country anyway. So people who speak French and people who speak Dutch. So even if you actually work for the state, you constantly are exposed to a different culture. But even more if you work for international organizations like NATO or the UN or the European Union here in Brussels. So you will never work only with people from your country. At least one person will be from another country. That alone will will help you questioning actually what it means to be authentic in your workplace. And when you have multiple people that come from multiple countries and they bring their own culture and then they bring it to a place that has a third culture from everybody else, what's the common culture? What's the common attitude towards authenticity? Is it appropriate in an office where there's an Italian, a Belgian, someone from Azerbaijan, someone from Spain, from Germany, someone from Israel, someone from Norway, and someone from Sweden? What do you bring to the office? What
Wow.
authentic self do you bring to the office? So in that
Yeah.
case, that's exactly the kind of thing that then either you build it by consensus, or there will be something that will kind of dominate because for example, you live in Belgium and then there's going to be some cultural elements that will be more dominant. But this is something that you cannot know until you get in, or actually you can, but that we're going to talk about it later. But it's also something that is a bit challenging because what we think that is a given, what we think, like, for example, reading the air, this is an expression I learned that they use in Japan. Reading through the lines in Italy is quite common, but in other countries, even in the US, for example, you don't read between the lines. It's quite clear what you want to say. It might be maybe a little bit too direct, depends on where you come from, but that's exactly the
Yeah.
point. So in this kind of multicultural environments, they're really thrilling, but at the same time can be a little bit of a challenge if you're not, as I always like to say, like water, and you adapt to the recipient that you're put it in. So these kind of challenges are at the same time of looking for something that fits you and your values and your beliefs and your passion. At the same time, in the city, you have to add another layer of working in an environment where whatever you think that is common sense might not be common sense in the offices that you're going to work in. Vice versa, then you might think that actually you cannot share anything. And for, of course, our LGBTQ plus listeners, this is something probably that we all know about. And actually, you might realize that there are some offices and there are some workplaces where you can be yourself fully, and you don't know, and you didn't expect it. So this is the kind of very intriguing thing that I do as well with clients, and that brought me to specialize in these two areas.
Wow, I had no idea, but it makes sense because every country's different, like the authenticity and how you can or can't be your true authentic self. So it's very fascinating.
Mm.
Can you share an example of a client or even yourself bumping up against those cultural differences in communication or even expectations?
There's plenty. First one that comes to mind is a Latvian colleague that thought that I was very aggressive, and it turned out that I was just being Italian. We were just having a normal conversation, and I, as you can imagine, was speaking maybe a little bit loud or moving my hands. I'm still Italian after all, if it doesn't sound like. So then this person was just feeling threatened, and luckily we had enough familiarity, let's say things quite clearly to each other. And then that's what they told me. And then I was like, but I'm not angry. I'm not upset. I'm not being aggressive. I'm just explaining my point of view. So yeah, it came out a little bit aggressive. And it's a very small thing. This is
Mhm.
very common with Italians, of course. People think that we're fighting all the time and we're not. We're just saying, how are you? But apart from the stereotype, it's actually happening all the time. And it happened to me several times in several offices, in several workplaces. Some other clients as well, without going too much into details, but they came from a culture where being direct was sort of an offense, but then they were working in an environment where it was actually the opposite. Being direct was actually being rewarded in a way and seen as something,
Hmm.
I trust you, so I'm going to be direct. So there are some dimensions in communication, in persuasion, even the direct feedback. I know that sometimes, for example, it happens, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the US, you don't give really direct feedback. You kind of mix it. Exactly. Well, in other cultures, this is not happening. It's actually, and it might feel from someone from the US a little bit rude, but they're not. They're just being radically transparent and radically honest because in their culture, that's what they value. So when we navigated this, even when I was working with someone from the Nordic countries, they're a little bit more direct compared to someone from Sicily. I was like, whoa, wait, that's a bit too, come on. And they were like, no, I'm just appreciating the fact that you did this, but you should, improve this, and that. I was like, is there another way to say it? And then we both realized, okay, we come from different cultures, so we probably have to learn how to work it out. There's plenty, and the more I work with clients, the more they come up. There's something that is always present in this story, which is communication and the knowledge and awareness of being just one little person in a sea of cultures, as it is again in Brussels, that you have just to learn how to navigate.
I like how, so this is really funny. So for me, I actually purposely listen or watch the news from Europe because
Hmm.
of the more direct and
Hmm.
blunt and honest. I think that's what I love about like the current state of like the politics in our world right now.
Hmm. Yeah.
I love seeing the European take on what we're dealing with here in the United States because you guys don't hold back and I love it. I think it's amazing. I just wish more people, you're right, people they don't say it. I think they don't say it here. That if anything, good old southern term here like in the southern United States
Mm.
is the term is like bless your heart. Well,
Mm.
it's really not a nice phrase by any means. It's actually kind of attacking you in a way, saying kind of how probably poorly you dressed or how you acted or something.
Mm.
It depends on the circumstances. But I mean, it's really funny to talk to people who are from the South because if you mention, oh, the bless your heart,
Mm.
they're like, oh, are you actually really meaning bless your heart or are you meaning the other meaning of bless your heart? And I was like, yeah, I'm actually meaning the nice version of it. So, but I think we just recently my partner and I watched Downton. We started watching Downton Abbey. He has never
Hmm.
seen it.
Hmm.
And the very first episode of the very first season, Maggie Smith's character is very snarky and she makes a comment. And my partner turns to me and goes, "Oh, we need more of that." And I was like,
Mm.
"Oh, don't worry. Maggie is very, very strong in this in this series. Her character is amazing. So don't worry. She will come back out. She will come flying with those remarks and it's like every episode. It's amazing. And I miss Maggie Smith because she's oh my gosh, her snarkiness is
Yeah,
maybe some of the best in like
that's true. Yeah.
the world of entertainment.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because then coming from a different culture like Italy, for me, the UK, and I met a lot of people from the UK, more often than not, I have to actually look and really listen to the double meaning of some words. For example, interesting. Do you really mean it? Or is it just a way to say, I don't like it, but I'm not going to say that I don't like it because you need to be polite with this person. So I'm just going to say, interesting. And then depending on the tone, you understand if it's actually, oh, this is interesting. I want to know more about that. Or it's just like, oh, I don't give up about it. And I'm just going to say something just because I want to be polite. So one of my closest friends, he's from Liverpool, and I hope he's going to listen to this. This is what happened in our 13 years of friendship. At some point, I was like, do you really mean what you're saying when you say interesting? And I was like, well, sometimes I don't. I'm like, okay, so with me, please just be more direct. Like, if you really don't like it, just say it, and I'm not going to take it as an offense. And he knows that I'm going to do the same. It's funny then, you see there's a spectrum between a lot of, and we're all in the Western world, let's say. So
Yeah.
imagine when I lived in China, that was like a challenge for me to understand exactly what kind of things to say, what kind of things not to say, and how to behave in a culture where, for example, leadership is not egalitarian at all. So there's a clear hierarchy and you got to follow that. And there are things that you don't say in public, and there are things that you don't say about people that might basically put them in a bad light. The concept of not losing face is very strong in a culture like China. Well, we don't care about that in Italy at all. This is the kind of things that even when we think, oh, these guys from this culture are so direct, and that's what you said, for example, from the news from Europe, well, then that's also another misconception. Europe is a continent. We're
Right.
very different from each other. So for us, from the southern part, from the southern countries in Europe, the UK is not that direct at all. French are way more direct, for example. So it also depends on that. And it's very interesting. And these kind of things I also realized by reading and working with clients, and of course, all of this is based on Erin Meyer's work about the culture map. But I also realized a lot of cultures do not really, there's no incentive, let's say, to reflect on what you're doing, what you're saying, what you're thinking, how you're thinking, and how this is shaped by the culture that you're living in. So only when you meet people from other countries, from other cultures, if you're open to that, then you can reflect and you think, oh, this is, they don't mean bad. They're just from a different place. But growing up in Italy, I wasn't that open in a way because we're not taught that until you
Hmm.
really reach a point and you meet people from other places and other cultures, then you open up a little bit. So that's another question that I want to explore, for example, in the future, maybe not now, but are there cultures that are a bit more open to self-reflection, and how is that helping the people that are members of that culture? And then, in a more specific, of course, for our listeners, are there cultures that are a bit more open in that sense on the self reflecting for LGBT people who already have to do a lot of self reflection because we go out of the norm, quote unquote, of course? And is that encouraged or not? Big questions that I have. And for
Yeah,
now, I have no answer for now, but this is the kind of thing that thrives me in a way. And in such a multicultural environment like Brussels, I think that anyone would start thinking about this because you're constantly exposed to so many cultures that if you do not learn somehow how to navigate them, it's quite challenging. I can tell you.
for sure. It's very, you gave me a lot of insight. I will say this, what I find interesting is doing this podcast. I have loved speaking to so many people that are not here in the United States
Hmm.
because I kind of know how everyone in a way thinks here about
Hmm.
certain, topics or whatever. But I think that's what I love. That's what even drew me just to have our initial conversation, because you're going to give possibly a different point of view than even like you just mentioned, like someone over in the UK or over in
Hmm.
Spain or
Hmm.
wherever. And I find that, and I love that. I love the different perspectives because it really, well, first off, it shows, number one, I know that I have an international audience, but second, it gives the opportunity for even an international audience for people to listen, because they'll be like, oh yeah, so that's how they think about this, or this is how this works over in this country. So in some ways I'm hoping that I'm educating my listeners, because I mean that's why I feel very fortunate the amount of people that have come on so far to my podcast and who will continue to come on. Is I am purposely making sure that whatever the message is, it's going to be reflective of the LGBTQ plus community wherever they might be located, and hopefully it's going to be reflective and hopefully able to be understood wherever they might be as well,
Yeah,
even if
absolutely. And that's why I love being here. And while you were talking, at some point, I remember a very funny moment. One of the first times I went to the US, I went to Boston. I was there with my ex, and I don't remember where we were, but we went to a coffee shop. And of course, as you probably many of your listeners would feel it's normal, that we approached the counter, and then the guy at the counter, or whatever, I don't remember who he was, but someone then just said, "Oh, hey, how are you?" And I just said how I felt and whatever, and I don't remember what I said, but then I said like, "Oh, what about you? And then my ex and then the person were both like, what are you doing? Like, it's like no one cares and no one like, why are you answering the question? Why are you asking it back? Like, what? I was like, but he asked me how I was. It's very nice from him. It's like, this is something that we would clearly do in Italy, but we would then expect an answer, and then we would also expect someone to ask it back. So of course, from that moment onward, I realized, okay, this is not something that you have to do. You know, like, you don't need to answer. But even these small
Well,
things.
it's funny though that you said that. Just how you say people react different ways in Italy or Europe, wherever. It's the same thing here. I feel
Mm,
that I just had a friend of mine who just traveled in the South. She was in like North Carolina and Tennessee, and she lives up in New Jersey, and
mm,
she could not believe the outpouring of kindness,
mm.
and people actually really wanted to know how she was doing and how things were going and how her travels were, because she said, "Oh, no one cares about that in New Jersey. They don't care. They're not going to have this long conversation that I just had." And I would have to say, nothing to a jab of people in the East, in Boston, New York, whatever, but it's kind of just how they are. It's just how that kind of how it's also. It's funny that you say you talk with your hands. That's how I kind of understand, like an East Coast person, especially a New Yorker, they very much talk with their hands, and it's
Uh,
it's funny that you say that. But
I had, when was it? A couple of days ago, I think. I went to a bar and then I was with a friend that was queuing. And then at some point, I realized it was another friend very far from me. And so we could not hear each other, but we had a micro conversation just with our hands, just to understand what she was doing there, why was she sitting over there, if I could go, and I was just waiting for my beer and whatever, like a micro conversation. And then I was surrounded by people who were not Italian. They just looked at me and they were like, what's going on? I was just like doing a bunch of gestures. She understood, I understood. We all set up, and then everything was fine. So looking from an outsider perspective, it was like, what's going on? Someone is like just gesturing in the air, and we were just having a full on conversation. But even in Boston, like I thought people in Boston, and I still believe it, they're super nice. And then I met someone from the South, and I understood what many people had told me, what you were saying as well, the niceness and the kindness. And I was like, so I probably thought that they were kind and nice in Boston as they are, but because I was also maybe comparing it to Paris, where they're not nice at all. And again, I don't want to generalize, of course, but there's, a level, a degree, let's say, as a spectrum of what you think is nice when, for example, you go to a bar or you go to a cafe. And these kind of things, they change even in Europe and even in the same country. I can tell you in Italy that there are differences in the north and the south, and also there are differences in how we work as well,
mhm.
and then what we bring to the office and at work. I was very lucky. I was in almost always in offices where I could bring my total self in a way that I was completely out with my colleagues and there was no problem, even to ways that I even one day stopped my boss from saying something. He was very, very angry, and he, in French, just used a word that is a slur, and then was like, I just could not say silent. And then I was just like, like, you shouldn't say that. And he looked at me and he was so sorry because he realized he had just used a word that unfortunately in French language is very common to insult someone and is an homophobic slur. Not because that person was a member of the LGBT community, but just because it's something to use as an insult. And I was like,
Mhm.
like that's not something you should use. And then he like was so sorry and profoundly sorry in a way that I was like, I'm very happy that I'm in an environment where I can be, not only I can be fully myself, but I can even correct my boss in a way and be like, hey, this is something that you shouldn't say. And I'm not offended because I know what it means in French. And I know that this is something that you didn't mean because you're homophobic, because I know you. But next person might not be. The
Yeah.
next colleague you have might not feel that, he made a mistake, but he didn't mean it, and not be so indulgent. Next person might just actually go to HR,
This is
because this
true.
is also
Yeah.
something that you don't do in Europe. So, you know, and he was like, no, you're right. Thank you so much. And so on. So, these kind of what do you bring to a multicultural environment like that? That's the one that I was telling you with a bunch of, we were like a small United Nation in the office, and how you can be completely authentic. That's how it felt.
So you mentioned Aaron Meyer earlier,
Yeah.
um, and their work in the eight and you had mentioned to me about the 8 dimensions of intercultural relations. For someone listening who's never heard of that framework, can you break it down how it helps people understand workplace dynamics?
I'll try to do my best because it's a very interesting and very profound book. And I loved it. And I found myself so often in the stories that she shares. So the eight categories that she uses are as follows, let's say. So, and then I will explain them later. So there's communication, there's evaluation, so the direct feedback we were talking about earlier, there's persuasion as well, there's leading, so the leadership, is it egalitarian or not, for example? How do we decide? Deciding collectively or there's a top down approach? Trust, is it task based or relationship based? Disagreeing, so how do we disagree? How do we communicate? Of course, this is very linked to communication in general. And then my favorite, scheduling, so time. How late is late? And this is the typical thing that happens in Brussels when you have a bunch of people from the south of Europe and some bunch of people from the north. Like, let's meet at 8. And for me, it's like, okay, if I arrive at 8:05, I'm not going to say I'm late because, 5 minutes is okay. Well, I've had backlashes in my 13 years here. And I should, like, now I say it, even if I'm 1, 2 minutes late. And my friends, many of them are Italians or from the south, you go like, why are you telling us that? Like, it's fine, 5 minutes. You don't even have to say it. Sometimes even 15, but that's another story. So these eight, so we're not going to go into details. So these eight categories are crucial to understand when you work in a multicultural environment, because what we think is implicit, how we, for example, communication, that's one of the most difficult to understand. Certain places where you read between the lines, you don't really expect everything to be very clear and very direct. And other places where actually you learn to do that because your culture, in a way, since it was a melting pot, and of course, maybe you can guess which country I'm talking about, built from a melting pot of different cultures, different people coming from different worlds, in a way, all coming to the new world, quote unquote. So, in a way, they all had to learn how to communicate in a way that was clear and not with sous-entendu, as they say in French. So, like, this kind of double meanings. So there are cultures where you definitely understand that if you say interesting, well, depending on the tone, it might actually mean, oh, this is absolutely horrible. And me coming from another country would be like, oh, they think it's good. And then you're like, no, you should read the room, you should read the air, as they say in Japan, and try to understand what's the context. So this is just one of the examples. A lot of the examples in the book are really eye-opening in that sense. And that made me realize I've lived this every single day of my life, and I kind of navigated it in a way, well, let's say spontaneous, but I also made a lot of mistakes, of course. I will never forget, I sat down too close to a colleague who's from Finland. Well, actually, that was 2 feet apart, but for that person was too close.
Wow. I
So
don't find
even,
that close at all, but okay.
you know, like I lived in Italy. I traveled a lot in Southeast Asia as well, and went to India, for example. That concept of too close is probably completely different, and I was like jammed in big part. Anyway, that's another story again. But so these kind of things are the foundation of navigating multicultural environment. That's also why I always suggest people to read the book, but also to then take it as a sort of not just these things are funny, these are stories that she collected everywhere, but this is actually what's happening in our lives every day. So in workplace dynamics, of course, for example, if we take decision making, in some cultures it's a bit more consensual, although there's a hierarchy that is very clear and you should not overstep, but then the decision making, it can be consensual. It goes bottom up, but it's still consensual at this level, and then consensual at the upper level, and then consensual at the upper one, and so on and so forth until it reaches the boss. And in other cultures, it's not. It's just like someone decides on the top, you're the boss, and that's what you do. And you expect the boss to be the one deciding. But when then the boss is from a different culture and then expects a decision to be made consensually, well, that's where the friction starts, or at least the misunderstandings, let's say. So all these dynamics, all these dimensions, they have a really crucial importance in workplace. And then, of course, on top of that, then as usual, we just put the layer as well of LGBTQ plus professionals, where there's another layer of risk and vulnerability, because how safe is to share everything about yourself? And that's a
Mhm.
big question that always happens when we start, for example, when we apply for a job. Of course, if we manage to reach the moment of the interview, then we might have the opportunity to ask, so what is the workplace culture? But I guess a lot of the people who are listening, and I was one of them as well, maybe not feel comfortable in asking in a way that shows that we're members of the LGBT community, because of course you don't want to, you don't assume that they will understand.
Mhm.
And this layer, of course, then adds on top of, I come from a country that is a little bit more conservative. So, of course, talking about my identity at work, if I were working in Italy, I wouldn't do that. But I live in a country where this is very much welcome. In this country, and one of the reasons I love it, the right wing party approved gay marriage, something that in Italy would be completely impossible to even imagine. So these kind of things then somehow influences, what you bring to the workplace, and the cultural differences that then once you are in it, then what can you share with your colleague who comes from Serbia? How do you navigate that? Of course, you start talking with this person and so on, tend to learn how they think, what they believe, and then you learn how to say things, or not to share stuff. But it's something that once we have the lenses, once we have the dimensions, then it's going to be easier to do.
Is that right? Sorry, are we good? I
Yes.
got a I got a weird message and then I was like, wait, what's going on? Sorry. I'm sorry, listeners. Oh,
You froze for
oh,
a second.
oh, yeah, I'm still that's so weird.
It happens, and you're still frozen.
Weird. Okay. Okay, now I'm okay. That's so odd. Anyway, technology. It's amazing. Oh my gosh, I keep freezing. Can you hear me at
Yes,
least?
very well.
Okay, because if I freeze, I freeze. I mean, if the
I
camera
can listen.
freezes and if the
I can
audio is
hear
good,
you.
I think that's all
Yes.
that really matters.
Sometimes technology is our worst enemy.
I'm gonna do something really quickly. Sorry,
I can go
listener.
off camera.
I'm gonna try.
Is it better like that?
So, where am I? Okay,
All fine
so
here.
strange. Anyway, I've recorded way too many for that to happen. That's so odd. Anyways, out of these different 8 dimensions, as Meyer calls them, which of these do you see causes the most friction in global teams?
That's a good question. I've seen frictions in all of them. In personal life, I would say, this is completely personal judgment, time is one of them that is really causes the most friction, I would say. But all the others, each one of them has a key importance, I would say, in the workplace. Depending on the job that you're doing, depending on the organization you're in, I would say that probably consensual, like decision making, so either consensual or top down, is one of the most challenging, and then causes frustration sometimes when you are expecting someone to take a decision, then doesn't take it in your eyes because they're just gathering the information, and makes it a little bit more consensual. But even just communication, which is the bare level of interaction between humans, that I think is tend to believe that that's the foundation of all the 8 dimensions in general. Because as long as you communicate well, then even the differences in how you perceive time, how you perceive trust, and so on and so forth, then they will be more manageable. If I know, because we've communicated, that your culture brings, in your culture, you trust people because of the relationship that you created with that person. And if I come from a country where this is more task based, I trust you because I know that you do a good job, regardless of what happens outside of work. We don't share meal, we don't share a beer, or these kind of things. Well,
Hmm.
then once we know this, communication, that's going to be the challenge of being like, okay, we're from different countries, we're from different cultures. How can we make it work? So that's why it's crucial for me. Once you know how to communicate, and once you are, let's say, culturally aware first of your own culture. And of course, it doesn't happen just like by thinking about it. It happens by reading, it happens by talking and meeting with other people from other cultures and from other countries that then are a sort of a mirror, or talking with a coach, of course. So all my clients are from different countries. A couple of them are from Italy, but many others are from many other countries in Europe. and a couple of them are also from the US. So every time, for example, at the beginning, I always say, if you see me moving my hands too much and that's bothering you, let me know. Because this is how I work. This is what I'm doing, for example, right now, because this is how I communicate. But I'm also aware of the fact that for some other people, it might be a little bit destabilizing, let's say. So these kind of things at the beginning, that's why communication is always crucial. And so that's why, probably to answer your question to full circle, that's probably the most crucial, although it's not. Once we know how to communicate, then everything else is going to be easy.
Very interesting. So, for LGBTQ plus professionals, as we know, there's an added layer of risk and vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
How do cultural differences affect what feels safe to share in the workplace?
That's exactly the biggest challenge for us when we reach a place that it's multicultural. There are some places where sharing personal details of our lives is not that safe. It is not that interesting and is not well seen because there's a clear division between your work and what's happening in your personal life. In some other places, and again, for example, if we think about countries where trust is based on relationship, you gotta share because that's how you build the trust, right? So for LGBTQ plus people, this is a layer that once we look at what's happening, once we look and we sort of like, sometimes I use the metaphor of chess, like we know all the pieces and who does what and how they move in an example for a way. So out of metaphor, how they think and what is their culturally bringing. So then we can decide what kind of strategy to implement at work. So in a way, for us, what we think that, for example, might be safe to share, for that you might have a partner or that you might just go to a concert tonight. Whatever the layer, not necessarily revealing your life, your personal life, and coming out at work, but even just revealing some personal details. You have a dog, I don't know, whatever it is, might not be safe. Or vice versa, you might think that you're going to work in, I'm not going to name countries, but a country that you might think it's going to be a little bit more conservative, and you think it's not going to be safe to share what I do outside of work. It's not going to be safe to share that I have a partner who is same sex. And actually, you might feel surprised because in that country, yes, it might be a bit more conservative, but it might be, again, trust based. So trust is relationship based. And so they actually expect you to share that. How safe it is, of course, it depends on the culture, on the workplace itself.
Mm-hmm.
But this is something that, of course, there are no rules that I can tell you that it's going to be like, this is going to be like this for all the workplaces in X country. But even just adding this layer, even just asking the question, do I know where I come from? Do I know how my thoughts are conditioned by my culture? Even just asking and knowing ourselves, the awareness that we're talking about, that is going to be, it's going to help us to understand other people. And then it's going to help us to know how safe it is to share and how safe it is to be ourselves, how safe it is to be completely our full authentic self.
Have you seen people find creative ways to balance authenticity with self protection in these environments?
Yes, I'm trying not to reveal too much as usual. Using neutral, it is difficult with language. There's another layer that we're not going to talk about today, which is language. So we're assuming that these multicultural environments, we all speak the same language, or at least we use one language that is going to be the one of the office, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, well, that might not be true at all, in the sense that, for example, that's what happened to me, one of my jobs. As I was saying, I was speaking four of them at the same time, not at the same time, meaning in the same day. Sometimes actually in the same sentence, I would start in English and then move to French and then finish in Spanish. But this is because we were like from all different countries and we all spoke the same languages. And so, of course, at some point, it was just easy to mix them all. So how to balance these two? Sometimes in the languages that we use, it might be English or it might be any other language, we might choose some words that are just more or less revealing. And when you are in multicultural environments and you speak more than one language, you might actually use a word from another language that is going to help you not to be too revealing or not to be too reserved in a way, and to understand. Let's take an example. English doesn't have gender in nouns. Everything is neutral. Romantic languages, we do have. Everything has a gender. Why? That's another topic. But then it's going to be easier to say my partner in English You don't know if that's a woman or a man or whatever. Well, then you have to be creative in my other native tongue, which is Italian, to be like, okay, what do I say to say that I have someone, but I don't want to reveal the gender of that person because it might not be safe. And then you have to find creative ways to say a word that is not revealing. So even this constant juggling of language, then it's something that, of course, it's very tiring. And then we go back to the career coaching. Do you want to do that all the time? Or would you rather find a job, not a job that where you fit the job description, where you fit the office and you fit the culture, but also the other way around? A culture where you don't have to juggle all the time, a culture in the office, in the workplace, where you don't have to hide in a way, but also where you just can be free to share what you want and also expecting other people will share what they want and also know that it's completely fine if you don't and it's completely fine if they don't. So even helping, so I help clients as well to find not only the job that fits them in terms of values and beliefs and everything that we said at the beginning, but also in terms of what kind of culture you want to be surrounded by, what kind of workplace you want to be in a way that is going to be welcoming to your culture and to how you think and how you behave and what you want to share? Is it manageable? Is it a place where even the cultural differences are managed in a way that it's consensual? For example, there are no clashes and so on and so forth. Because again, we do not just need to fit the job description. Work, a job needs also to fit us.
Mm-hmm.
So I suggest always to have a look. What's the company culture? What are the members of the team? If you know, for example, now with LinkedIn, you can know basically the composition of every single team that you're going to work in. Try to imagine if you know already. That's why I always suggest again to read the book. But if you know already some elements, then you might also expect some of it. Again, you might be surprised, but you can also have a little bit of more knowledge and big lines of what's going to happen in that workplace.
So I like how you said, excuse me, I like how you said that finding out if we fit the job, but if the company also, they have to fit us.
Mm-mm.
And you kind of touched on this just very, very lightly, but what are some practical ways that job seekers can research or interview a company to figure out if it's a supportive culture?
The simplest answer is actually ask. It sounds weird sometimes, but actually, we do have the power of asking questions. Let's imagine at the interview directly, but even before that, we can still ask questions. If that's at the interview stage, of course, we ask directly to the recruiter or the member of the team that is actually doing the interview. But we can also ask around. It's easy in a place that is not as big, like this. Belgium is not that big country, for example. You will always, if you have an extended network of people that you know, there will always be someone that you know that know someone that you know in that team, for example. And just by asking, what is the company culture, what do you feel like, do those interviews, what do they call them, they sort of in, I don't remember, but do those interviews of just knowing a little bit more about what the company stands for and in what's it like to work in the company. And even if you reach the stage of the interview, I know that a lot of people are very afraid. I was one of them, very afraid to ask questions at the interview stage. Actually, it's better to, even when we think, oh, this is actually a question that I probably shouldn't ask. Well, just go for it, because the more you know, the more you will then understand if that job fits you, not just you fitting the job. So this is I think the most, yeah, I would say simple, but also important of all the suggestions. Ask. And then, of course, if you can, research as much as you can about the companies. A lot of companies, they actually write these kind of things on their website and on LinkedIn, for example, as well. You can even look for, if people post on LinkedIn, you can look for what the company says about XYZ or what the people inside as well. So these two sort of like do your research, but also be ready to ask the questions. These are like two very powerful, very simple, but very powerful ways to know and to deal with it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, doing your research, I think it's so powerful, but I like that you said just ask.
Hmm.
I think a lot of times, and it can be tricky, especially
Hmm.
being a part of the LGBTQ plus community, especially I have a feeling those who are interviewing currently, it
Hmm.
could be definitely a little bit more challenging.
Mm.
because you want to make sure that it's a supportive, culture,
Yeah.
but you have to kind of say it in a way that's maybe not going to be so focused potentially on,
Mm.
the diversity, inclusion, and equality,
Yeah.
just because of everything going on with that right now. And
Yeah.
yeah, you just have, I feel you have to be a little bit careful on how you probably ask,
Hmm.
but there's great tools out there,
Oh,
listeners,
yes.
to make sure you ask in the right way, that it doesn't in some ways maybe feel offensive, but also it's going to still make you look good in the way you're asking. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
I have, let's say, the privilege of living in a continent where, especially in a country where DEI is not demonized, and actually it's still very much present in workplace. So sometimes even just a very blunt question about it can bring you, to unexpected sometimes answers. But even if you didn't expect that, at least at least you have the information, and information is crucial. Then you make
Hmm.
the decision that you want. It might have been the perfect job from the outside, and then that inside in the team and in the office and in the company, well, these things that might be as important to you, then they're not respected, and then it's up to you. You might still decide to go or not. But that's a totally different thing. The
Yeah.
first is always is information. So don't be afraid to ask. And as you said, there are several ways to ask questions in a way that is not too inquisitive and is not revealing too much about yourself.
Well, and also just to kind of piggyback on that as well, there are companies that are, a lot of them are still using DEI type policies. They're just not calling it. They've renamed it. They've reworded
Exactly.
it.
Exactly.
So asking still about it is not necessarily such a bad thing. They've changed the wording. And I've heard this from numerous different, professionals that have said, oh, well, it was called this. Obviously now we're calling it this. And this was someone within the US government. They said,
Hmm.
they were a government where they said, okay, well, we're not calling it this, we're now calling it this, just because it's still important. We just,
Hmm.
due to the current administration, we have to change how
Hmm.
we are acknowledging it. But
Sometimes
yeah, again, just ask.
exactly. That's what happens. And even if you don't use the label, and you actually sometimes say what's in the tin, as the expressions goes, you don't ask for DI, but you ask for the content of it, and
Hmm.
that's a totally legitimate question.
Yeah. So I know you have some great stories.
Yeah.
So one of those being the time a Latvian colleague thought you were being aggressive when really you were just being Italian. Can you share that story and what it taught you?
So I touched a little bit on that earlier, and that taught me the importance of, again, communication and the importance of awareness. Once you're aware of the fact that you might not be, well, again, I like to quote, we're not in Kansas, Toto. Yeah. So you're not back in your own country, and people might just not get what you think it's, oh, but this is, of course, you get it. There's no need to explain it. So many times I've told one of my best
Hmm.
friends here, for example, be a little bit more clear in what you're saying, because not everyone might understand. Not everyone reads your mind. So that story, but many other stories as well, they taught me exactly this. Be aware of the fact that your culture has some features, some elements that might not be shared by other people from other cultures. So expect to, I wouldn't say expect the worst, but expect in a way that you might not be understood, not because the other people, but the person doesn't want to. It's just because the tools are different, because we come from different cultures that give us different tools. So even just this little episode was like a very, very revealing in a way. Then from that moment onwards, of course, we understood. And what for me, for example, was my colleague being very reserved. I was like, well, now I understand that it's not that. It's just that they come from a country and a culture where, they don't share as much as I do from when I'm in Italy, for example. So there's plenty of occasions like this, many moments as well. Speaking multiple languages as well helps in a way where you think that using a specific word is going to be easily understood by the other person, even if that person is actually a native speaker. And actually, there's a double meaning. Again, we go back to the example of interesting, or what you said, bless your heart. How do you know that you're not wrong? Well, experience.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
exactly the thing. Like every single experience that I had, that exactly the kind of idea. Okay, I'm glad I had it because that's how I learned. I could have read everything in the books and still make, let's say, quote unquote mistakes. But it's then when you actually have the experience and you go like, oh, you know. So as I mentioned earlier, like sitting again, quote unquote, too close to a Finnish colleague and it was still 2 feet apart. Now I know that maybe I should ask first. Hey, can I sit here? And then leave it up to them.
That's so funny to me. 2 feet seems like such a distance, but yeah, but I
Yeah,
get it. I mean, every culture is different, so it makes sense.
exactly.
There are definitely some where people are like right in your face,
Mm.
and there's no such thing as personal space. And then you have others where they want that space. So I
Exactly.
get it.
So this is another thing that I learned. This kind of, assume that it might not be appropriate or right, let's say. So ask again. It goes back to the communication and everything goes back to that. Look, just ask and be like, hey, is it appropriate to do that? Is it appropriate to touch you on the elbow, for example? And I'm not even going too much into like, what is groping or everything. Like, sexual assault.
Yeah.
The different countries have a different opinion about what is sexual assaulting someone. But even just like, hey, is it appropriate if I sit close to you? Is it appropriate if I'm a man and I'm speaking to a female colleague? And is it appropriate to talk to you in a certain way? Even just asking that puts also the other person in a position of being, I am seen, I am understood. Like someone understands that I come from different cultures, so they have this awareness and they also have the care of being like, hey, is it okay for you? And of course, again, for us being in the LGBTQ plus community, knowing that the people in the office, the people in the workplace will do the same and will be very open and be like, hey, if there's something that we think might not be appropriate, we're going to ask you. And then you will have the opportunity to say, oh, this is not appropriate, this is making me I don't know, feel uncomfortable, and so on and so forth. This is another element that you can still ask. How do you approach if someone feels uncomfortable in XYZ? And still from there you can even infer what's their attitude towards DI. And that's another question that you don't ask directly, but kind of why, find your way in. So it goes back to communication and just ask.
So ultimately, your work is about empowerment. So when
Mhm.
someone finally leaves that toxic, high prestige job and steps into a healthier environment, what changes do you see in them?
They glow. They glow. They glow. This is the simplest. Like that's it's amazing. Every time I think about it, I have chills. I remember exactly the moment when they step into that, and then they behave differently. They look at me differently. They have a completely different face in the sense of like the expression, and I mean it's beautiful to be a spectator of that, to witness this change. They glow, and this is what then makes me fully alive. The possibility of witnessing this and knowing that even just with a couple of questions, which is coaching, I could help someone just step into a healthier environment and then glow and feel completely themselves. Then, of course, you see other little things of like they're way more confident, they speak differently, they have even a posture that actually is different. I saw it in myself when I stepped out of my old job and then became what I was probably meant to be in this life. And I walk differently, I talk differently. And I've had this as a feedback from my friends and the people that know me. And this is exactly what happens as well with clients. They act differently, and even just they sit differently. But again, the most chill that gives me chills. That is exactly this glowing, and it's very difficult to explain. But the moment you witness it, the moment you see it, the moment you see that someone is really happy and they're stepping into their real identity, it's just beautiful.
I agree. What would you say to the listeners right now who are scared to make that leap, but know that deep down they need to make that change?
You don't need to abandon ship completely and suddenly. There are many, many small steps that you can do and change course and things that are still safe that you can still do, for example, in your own job. While you're currently in a place that doesn't fit you anymore, but instead of jumping completely, you can still, for example, I don't know, change your LinkedIn profile, update it in a way, make you available for recruiters on LinkedIn If you can, of course, if you don't have, for example, your boss as of your friend on LinkedIn. But imagining that you
Mhm.
don't, for example, this is a very small thing that already puts you in a different energy, for example. So there's no need to do as I did, for example. I always say to my clients, there's no need to do like I did. I jumped out of this job and because I really felt it. But again, as I mentioned, I wanted to become a psychologist when I was 18. So it was kind of like coming back home. But I also understand not everyone feels the same. So, and even though I still took some small steps to gradually leave my job in a way that then I would have somehow soft landing. So there's plenty of things that you can do, and it all depends, of course, where you live and in what kind of workplace you're actually at the moment. In a country like Belgium, where, for example, unemployment benefit until now is quite generous in a way in terms of time, then maybe you can still, jump out of the blue and then have a couple of months where you still have a good unemployment benefit, and then it helps you because then looking for another job, it's a job in itself, and we all know that. So you need
Mhm.
maybe a little bit of clear, your mind needs to be clear and you need to rest a little bit so you can take that opportunity. But in other countries, and for example, Italy is one of them, unemployment benefit might not be that generous. So you might have other options. So there might be other small steps that you could take that might help you to have a softer landing instead of just jumping out of water, into the waters. So you kind of look around you, look at the resources that you have, the possibility that the system gives you, and the possibilities that you also have in terms of skills and passions. And you might even start volunteering in the profession that you want to move to. You can start volunteering in your free time. And that's like a small step, but you're not completely leaving your main source of income. Let's just also say it. But you're exploring something. And don't be afraid of failure, because failure is just data. Every time you fail, it's actually new data that will help you next time to do better. And I always say it's never a mistake unless you do it again, because otherwise it's a lesson learned. So if you do exactly the same thing twice, then it might be a mistake. But if next time you change even just one small thing, that means that you learned something. So that wasn't a mistake, that was a lesson learned. So even if you think, oh my God, what if I fail? That's going to be data. That's going to be information that you will use to be better next time.
All right. Okay, so now we're going to do what I call my rapid fire questions. You
Yes,
didn't get to see these. I come up with these, and all I ask
I know.
is don't think too long.
Yeah.
It is rapid fire for a reason.
Hmm.
Quick answer, whatever comes to your mind first. And if we have to go back to a question, that's totally fine. That has come up a few times. So, and I get it, but I don't think any of your questions probably will make you have to think probably too
Okay.
much or have to come back to. But I could be wrong.
Let's see.
So, coffee, tea, and I'm going to add in water because we all drink a lot of water. What fuels your coaching sessions?
Coffee. This is what I always give my clients when we meet in person. And most of the times they accept.
All right. I'm a coffee drinker, so I get it. So, what's one cultural faux pas that you made early in your career that still makes you laugh today?
I don't remember. I actually really don't remember because I tend to forget the faux pas. And so I don't remember. We'll have to, unfortunately, say just that. I just don't remember. So maybe I'll think about it.
All right. What's one piece of advice that you'd give your younger self starting out in those high prestige but toxic jobs?
Ask yourself the right questions and don't be afraid of it. Even ask for help if you don't know what the right questions are, but don't be afraid of just asking yourself the good questions.
All right. I like that. It's smart. Ask. We've said it many times.
Exactly. Because whatever answer, again, it's going to be data. And again, it's going to be the foundation for your decision. If you don't know where you stand, you cannot know where you want to go or where you can go. And again, I go again back to navigation metaphors or like a GPS. You want to go to Washington, for example, if you know where you want to go. But if you don't know where you're starting, if you're starting from Boston, if you're starting from Arizona, it's going to be a totally different route. So you need to know as well yourself. So don't be afraid of ask yourself the right questions. I failed at doing that some years ago. And I don't regret it because I think that if I love myself right now, it's also because of the fact that I've made some, again, quote unquote, mistakes in the past. So I don't regret anything that happened in my life, even the bad things, even the bad relationships, the faux pas. That's also why I don't remember them. That's why I even have like a tattoo on my arm that says thank you to everything that happened to my life, because even the negative things brought me to where I am now. If I love myself now, it's because also that, not just the good things. So it doesn't matter what comes out, but being able to ask yourself the right questions is super important.
All right. Well, this has been fun. I have actually really enjoyed our conversation. So
Me
I just
too.
have one final question. This is it. I promise this is no, there is nothing more.
I'm ready.
If someone's feeling out of place in a multicultural work environment, what's one simple piece of advice you'd want them to walk away with today?
I don't want to repeat myself, but it's going to be again, ask yourself the right questions. Awareness is going to be what will save you from an unfulfilling job, because you might not know what makes you unfulfilled until you ask yourself the good questions. You might not know that you're unfulfilled because a value is not respected in your job, or because you believe that you're not enough. So if you know where to find the solution, then that's already a good start.
And you know what? We've brought it up numerous times, but it's clearly a consistent theme. You need to ask yourself. You need to ask. If you don't know what you want to do, how are you going to know if you're really going for the right job, the right career, whatever you might want to do? I mean, you have to go with what you want, not
Exactly.
what a family member, a partner, husband, wife, whatever it might be, neighbor, they could give you all the advice they want. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you're the one in that role. They're
Yes.
not. Even if they've had the experience doing it or they know someone who's done that type of role, if they haven't done it,
Yeah.
it's not really the greatest of advice. But also, again, you have to do what you want to do. It,
Exactly.
it has to feel right.
Even when you talk with someone who's been in your position, they're not you.
Right.
They don't know what it feels to be you. They don't know what you want. They don't know that. And if you don't know how to ask yourself the right questions, if you don't know what to ask yourself, well, then ask for help. And you will find career coaches like us that will ask you the right questions. And that, even just one, two questions, can completely change your life.
For sure. So, Daniela, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your stories today. I think so many of us can relate to the tension between wanting to succeed in prestigious roles and realizing those jobs often come at the expense of our health and authenticity.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. It was been amazing, as I imagined. So thank you so much.
So, for those of you listening, if you're navigating a multicultural workplace or considering a big career change, I hope that today's conversation reminded you that you don't have to settle for toxic environments. You can find spaces that celebrate who you are, cultural and all. If you'd like to connect with Daniela, you can find him on LinkedIn. I'll drop that link in the show notes. And depending on where you're tuning in, he may have also a free resource available to help you navigate these exact challenges. So keep an eye out for that as well. So until next time, stay empowered, stay out, and keep building a career that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside.